Chapter 8, Kretakano's Long Story, An Inquiry into the Nature of Pain. I was born on May 29th, Kretakano began her story, and the night of my 20th birthday, I resolved to take my own life. I put a fresh cup of coffee in front of her. She added cream and gave it a languid stir. No sugar. I drank my coffee black, as always. The clock on the shelf continued its dry rapping on the walls of time. Kretakano looked hard at me and said, I wonder if I should begin at the beginning, where I was born, family life, and that kind of thing. Whatever you like, it's up to you. Whatever you find the most comfortable, I said. I was the thought of the 3 children, she said. Malta and I have an older brother. My father ran his own clinic in Kanagawa Prefecture. The family had nothing you could call domestic problems. I grew up in an ordinary home, the kind you can find anywhere. My parents were very serious people who believed strongly in the value of hard work. They were rather strict with us, but it seemed to me they also gave us a fair amount of autonomy where little things were concerned. We were well off, but my parents did not believe in giving their children extra money for frills. I suppose I had a rather frugal upbringing. Malta was 5 years older than I. There had been something different about her from the beginning. She was able to guess things. She'd know that the patient in the room so-and-so had just died, or exactly where they could find a lost wallet, or whatever. Everybody enjoyed this at first, and often found it useful. But soon it began to bother my parents. They ordered her never to talk about things that did not have a clear basis in fact, in the presence of other people. My father had his position as head of the hospital to think about. He didn't want people hearing that his daughter had supernatural powers. Malta put a lock on her mouth after that. Not only did she stop talking about things that did not have a clear basis in fact, but she rarely joined in even the most ordinary conversation. To me, though, she opened her heart. We grew up very close. She would say, Don't ever tell anybody I told you this. Then she'd say something like, There's going to be a fire down the street. Or, Auntie so-and-so in Santagaya is going to get worse. And she was always right. I was still just a little girl, so I thought it was great fun. It never occurred to me to be frightened or to find it eerie. Ever since I can remember, I would always follow my big sister around and expect to hear her messages. These special powers of hers grew stronger as she grew older, but she did not know how to use or nurture them, and this caused her a great deal of anguish. There was no one she could go for advice, no one she could look up for guidance. This made her a very lonely teenager. She had to solve everything by herself. She had to find all the answers herself. In our home, she was unhappy. There was never a time when she could find peace in her heart. She had to suppress her own powers and keep them hidden. It was like growing a large, powerful plant in a little pot. It was unnatural. It was wrong. All she knew was that she had to get out of there as soon as possible. She believed that somewhere there was a world that was right for her, a way of life that was right for her. Until she graduated from high school, though, she had to keep herself in check. She was determined not to go to college, but rather to go abroad after graduating from high school. My parents had lived an ordinary life, of course, and they were not prepared to let her do this. So my sister worked hard to raise the money she would need, and then she ran away. The first place she went to was Hawaii. She lived on Kauai for 2 years. She had read somewhere that Kauai's north shore had an area with springs that produced marvelous water. Already back then, my sister had a profound interest in water. She believed that human existence was largely controlled by the elements of water, which is why she went to live in Kauai. At the time, there was still a hippie commune in the interior of the island. She lived as a member of the commune. The water there had a great influence on her spiritual powers. By taking that water into her body, she was able to attain a greater harmony between her powers and her physical being. She wrote to me, telling me how wonderful this was, and her letters made me very happy. But soon the area could no longer satisfy her. True, it was a beautiful, peaceful land, and the people there sought only spiritual peace, free from material desires. But they were too dependent on sex and drugs. My sisters did not need these things. After 2 years on Kauai, she left. From there, she went to Canada, and after traveling around the northern United States, she continued on to Europe. She sampled the water everywhere she went and succeeded in finding marvelous water in several places, but none of it was the perfect water. So she kept traveling. Whenever she ran out of money, she would do something like fortune telling. People would reward her for helping find lost things or missing persons. She would have preferred not to take the money. Powers bestowed by heaven should not be exchanged for worldly goods. At the time, though, it was the only way she could keep herself alive. People heard about her divination everywhere she went. It was easy for her to make money. She even helped the police with an investigation in England. A little girl was missing, and she found where the body had been hidden. She also found the murderous globe nearby. The man was arrested and confessed. It was in all the newspapers. I'll show you the clippings sometime. Anyhow, she went on wandering through Europe like this until she ended up in Malta. Close to 5 years had gone by since her departure from Japan, and this place turned out to be her destination in her search for water. I suppose she must have told you about this herself? I nodded. All the time she was wandering through the world, Malta would send me letters. Of course, there were times when she couldn't manage to write, but almost every week I would receive a long letter from her about where she was and what she was doing. We were still very close. Even over long distances, we were able to share our feelings with each other through our letters. And what wonderful letters they were! If you could read them, you'd see what a wonderful person she is. Through her letters, I was able to encounter so many different worlds, so many interesting people. Her letters gave me such encouragement. They helped me grow. For that, I will always be deeply grateful to my sister. I don't negate what she did for me in any way. But finally, letters are just letters. When I was in my most difficult teenage years, when I needed my sister more than ever, she was always somewhere far away. I could not stretch out my hand and find her there next to me. In our family, I was all alone, isolated. My teen years were filled with pain, and later I will tell you more about that pain. There was no one I could go to for advice. In that case, I was just as lonely as Malta had been. If she had been near me then, my life would have been different from what it is today. She would have given me words of advice and encouragement and salvation. But what's the point of bringing such things up now? Just as Malta had to find her own way by herself, I had to find my own way by myself. And when I turned 20, I decided to kill myself. Greta Kahn took her cup and drank her remaining coffee. "What delicious coffee," she said. "Thanks," I said, as casually as possible. "Can I offer you something to eat? I boiled some eggs a little while ago." After some hesitation, she said she would have one. I brought eggs and salt from the kitchen and poured her more coffee. With no sense of urgency, Greta Kahn and I sat about peeling and eating our eggs and drinking coffee. While we were doing this, the phone rang, but I didn't answer it. After 15 or 16 rings, it stopped. All the time, Greta Kahn seemed unaware of the ringing. When she finished her egg, Greta Kahn took a small handkerchief from the white patterned leather bag and wiped her mouth. Then she tugged at the hem of her skirt. "Once I had decided to kill myself, I wanted to leave a note behind. I sat at my desk for an hour, trying to write down my reasons for dying. I wanted to make it clear that no one else was to blame, that the reasons were all inside me. I didn't want my family feeling responsible for something that was not their fault. But I could not finish the note. I tried over and over, but each new version seemed worse than the last. When I read what I had written, it sounded foolish, even comical. The more serious I tried to make it, the more ridiculous it came out. In the end, I decided not to write anything at all. It was a very simple matter, I felt. I was disappointed with my life. I could no longer endure the many kinds of pain that my life continued to cause me. I had endured the pain for 20 years. My life had been nothing but an unrelenting source of pain. But I had tried to bear it as best I could. I have absolute confidence in the validity of my efforts to bear the pain. I can declare here with genuine pride that my efforts were second to none. I was not giving up without a fight. But the day I turned 20, I reached a simple conclusion. Life was not worth continuing such a struggle. She stopped speaking and spent some time aligning the corners of the white handkerchief on her lap. When she looked down, her long false eyelashes cast gentle shadows on her face. I cleared my throat. I felt I ought to say something, but I didn't know what to say, and so I kept silent. In the distance, I heard the wind-up bird cry. "The pain was what caused me to decide to die," said Ketakano. "And when I say pain, that is exactly what I mean. Nothing mental or metaphorical, but physical pain, pure and simple. Plain, ordinary, direct, physical, and for that reason all the more intense. Pain, headache, toothache, menstrual cramps, lower back pain, stiff shoulders, fever, muscle ache, burns, frostbite, sprains, fractures, blows to the body. All my life I have experienced physical pain with far greater frequency and intensity than others. Take my teeth, for example. They seem to have one inborn defect. They would give me pain from one end of the ear to the other. No matter how carefully I brushed, or how many times a day, or how strictly I avoided sweets, it did no good. All my efforts ended in cavities. To make matter worse, anesthetics seemed to have no effect on me. Going to the dentist was always a nightmare. The pain was beyond describing. It scared me to death. And then my terrible periods began. They were incredibly heavy. For a week at a time, I would be in such pain. It was as if someone were twisting a drill inside me. My head would throb. You probably can't imagine what it was like, Mr. Okada, but the pain would bring tears to my eyes. For a week out of every month, I would be tortured by this unbearable pain. If I boarded a plane, my head would feel as if it were splitting open from the changes in air pressure. The doctor said it had something to do with the structure of my ears, that this sort of thing happens if the inner ear has a shape that is sensitive to pressure changes. The same thing often happened to me on elevators. I can take elevators in tall buildings. The pain is so intense, it feels as if my head's going to split open in several places and the blood gush out. And then there was my stomach. At least once a week it would give me such sharp, piercing pain that I couldn't get up in the morning. The doctors could never find a cause. Some suggested it was mental, but even if it was, the pain still hurt. As much as I was suffering, though, I could not stay home from school. If I had skipped school every time something hurt me, I would never have gone at all. Whenever I bumped into something, it would leave a bruise on my body. Looking at myself in the bathroom mirror always made me want to cry. My body was covered with so many dark bruises. I looked like a rotten apple. I hated to let anyone see me in a bathing suit. Ever since I can remember, I have hardly ever gone swimming for that reason. Another problem I had was the difference in the size of my feet. Whenever I bought new shoes, the larger foot would be in terrible pain until the shoe was broken in. Because of all these problems, I almost never did sports. In junior high school, my friends once dragged me to an ice skating rink. I fell and hurt my head so badly that afterward I would get a terrible headache there every winter. It felt as if I had been jabbed with a big, thick needle. Any number of times I fell over trying to get up from a chair. I suffered from constipation as well. A bowel movement every few days would be nothing but pain for me, and my shoulders would stiffen up terribly. The muscles would tighten until they were literally as hard as rock. It was so painful. I couldn't stand up, but lying down was no help either. I imagined that my suffering must be much like that of a Chinese punishment I had read about. They would stuff a person in a box for several years. When my shoulders were at their worst, I could hardly breathe. I could go on and on listing all the various pains I have suffered in my life, but it would only bore you, Mr. Okada. So I will just leave it at this. What I want to convey to you is the fact that my body was a virtual sample book of pain. I experienced every pain imaginable. I began to think I had been cursed, that life was so unfair. I might have been able to go on bearing the pain if the other people in the world had had to live the way I did, but they didn't, and I couldn't. Pain was not something that was dealt out fairly. I tried asking people about pain, but nobody knew what real pain was. The majority of people in the world live without feeling much pain, at least on a daily basis. When this finally hit me, I had just entered junior high school at the time. It made me so sad I couldn't stop crying. Why me? Why did I have to be the one to bear such terrible burden? I wanted to die right then and there. But at the same time, another thought came to me. This could go on forever. One morning I would wake up and the pain would have disappeared, suddenly with no explanation, and a whole new, peaceful life without pain would open up for me. It was not a thought in which I could place a great deal of faith, however. And so I revealed these thoughts of mine to my sister. I told my sister I didn't want to go on living in such pain. What was I to do? After she thought about it for a while, she said this: "There is definitely something wrong with you, I'm sure, but I don't know what it is, and I don't know what you should do about it. I don't have the power yet to make such judgments. All I know is that you should at least wait until you're 20, bear it until you turn 20, and then make your own decision. That would be the best thing." This was how I decided to go on living until I was 20. But no matter how much time went by, the situation did not improve. Far from it. The pain became even more intense. This taught me only one thing. As the body develops, the volume of pain increases proportionately. I endured the pain, however, for 8 years. I went on living all the time, trying to see only the good side of life. I didn't complain to anyone. I strove to keep on smiling even when the pain was at its worst. I disciplined myself always to present an exterior of calm when the pain was so intense that I could hardly go on standing. Crying and complaining could not reduce the pain, it could only make me more miserable than ever. As a result of my efforts, people loved me. They saw me as a quiet, good-natured girl. I had the confidence of grown-ups and the friendships of people of my own age. I might have had a perfect life, a perfect adolescence, if it hadn't been for the pain. But it was always there. It was like my shadow. If I forgot about it for an instant, the pain would attack yet another part of my body. In college, I found a boyfriend, and in the summer of my freshman year, I lost my virginity. Even this, as I could have predicted, gave me only pain. An experienced girlfriend of mine assured me that it would stop hurting when I got used to it, but it never did. Whenever I slept with him, the pain would bring tears to my eyes. One day, I told my boyfriend that I didn't want to have sex anymore. I told him, "I love you, but I never want to experience this pain again." He said he had never heard anything so ridiculous. "You've got an emotional problem," he said. "Just relax and it will stop hurting. It will even feel good. Everybody else does it, so you can too. You're just not trying hard enough. You're babying yourself. You're using this pain thing to cover up your problem. Stop complaining. It won't do you any good." When I heard this, after all I had endured over the years, I exploded. "What do you know about pain?" I shouted at him. "The pain I feel is no ordinary pain. I know what pain is like. I've had them all. When I say something hurts, it really hurts." I tried to explain by listing every single pain I had experienced, but he didn't understand a thing. It's impossible to understand real pain unless you have experienced it yourself. So that was the end of our relationship. My 20th birthday came soon after that. For 20 long years, I had endured the pain, hoping there would be some bright turning point, but it had never happened. I felt utterly defeated. I wished I had died sooner. My long detour had only stressed out the pain. At this point, Greta Kano took a single deep breath. On the table in front of her sat the dish with eggshells and her empty coffee cup. On her lap lay the handkerchief that she had folded with such care. As if recalling the time, she glanced at the clock on the shelf. "I am very sorry," she said in a dry little voice. "I hadn't intended to talk so long. I've taken too much of your time as it is. I won't impose on you any longer. I don't know how to apologize for having bored you at such length." She grasped the strap of her white pattern leather bag and stood up from the sofa. This took me off guard. "Just a minute, please," I said, flustered. I didn't want her to end her story in the middle. "If you're worried about taking my time, then don't worry. I'm free all afternoon. As long as you've told me this much, why not go to the end? There's more to your story, I'm sure." "Of course there is," she said, looking down at me, both hands in a tight grip on the strap of her bag. "What I've told you so far is more like an introduction." I asked her to wait a moment and went to the kitchen. Standing in front of the sink, I gave myself time for 2 deep breaths. Then I took 2 glasses from the cabinet, put ice in them, and filled them with orange juice from the refrigerator. Placing the glasses on a small tray, I brought them into the living room. I had gone through these motions with deliberate slowness, but I found her standing as I had left her. When I set the glasses of juice on the table, though, she seemed to have second thoughts. She settled onto the sofa again and placed her bag at her side. "You want me to tell my story to the very end?" she asked. "Are you sure?" "Quite sure," I said. She drank half her orange juice and went on with her story. "I failed to kill myself, of course. If I had succeeded, I wouldn't be here now. drinking orange juice with you, Mr. Okata?" She looked into my eyes and I gave her a little smile of agreement. If I had died according to plan, it would have been the final solution for me. Dying would have meant the end of consciousness, and I would never have had to feel pain again, which is exactly what I wanted. Unfortunately, however, I chose the wrong method to die. At 9 o'clock on the night of May 29th, I went to my brother's room and asked to borrow his car. It was a shiny new Toyota MR2, and the thought of letting me take it made him look very unhappy. But I didn't care. He couldn't refuse because I had lent him money to help him buy it. I took the key and drove it for half an hour. The car still had barely 1,000 miles on it. A touch of the gas pedal could make it fly. It was the perfect car for my purposes. I drove as far as the Tama River on the outskirts of the city, and there I found a massive stone wall of the kind I had in mind. It was the outer wall of a big condominium building, and it stood at the far end of a dead-end street. I gave myself plenty room to accelerate, and then I pressed the accelerator to the floor. I must have been doing close to 100 miles an hour when I slammed into the wall and lost consciousness. Unfortunately for me, however, the wall turned out to be far less solid than it had appeared. To save money, they had not anchored it properly. The wall simply crumbled, and the front end of the car was crushed flat. That's all that happened. Because it was so soft, the wall absorbed the impact. As if that weren't bad enough, in my confusion, I had forgotten to undo my seatbelt. And so I escaped death. I was hardly even injured, and strangest of all, I felt almost no pain. It was the weirdest thing. They took me to the hospital and patched up my one broken rib. The police came to investigate, but I told them I didn't remember a thing. I said I had probably mixed up the gas and the brake, and they believed me. I had just turned 20, and it had been only 6 months since I got my license. Besides, I just didn't look like the suicidal type who would try to kill herself with her seatbelt fastened. Once I was out of the hospital, I had several difficult problems to face. First, I had to pay off the outstanding loan on the MR2 that I had turned into scrap metal. Through some error with the insurance company, the car had not been covered. Now that it was too late, I realized that to do myself in, I should have rented a car with a proper insurance. At the time, of course, insurance was the last thing on my mind. It never occurred to me that my brother's car wouldn't have enough insurance on it, or that I would fail to kill myself. I ran into a stone wall at 100 miles an hour. It was amazing that I survived. A short time later, I received a bill from the condominium association for repair of the wall. They were demanding 1,364,294 yen from me, immediately in cash. All I could do was borrow it from my father. He was willing to give it to me in the form of a loan, but he insisted that I pay him back. My father was very proper when it came to matters of money. He said it was my responsibility for having caused the accident, and he expected me to pay him back in full and on schedule. In fact, at the time, he had very little money to spare. He was in the process of expanding his clinic and was having trouble raising the money for the project. I thought again about killing myself. This time, I would do a proper job. I would jump from the 15th floor of the university administration building. There would be no slip-ups that way. I would die for sure. I made several trial runs. I picked the best window for the job. I was on the verge of jumping. But something held me back. There was something wrong, something nagging at me. At the second, that something almost literally pulled me back from the edge. A good deal of time went by, though, before I realized what that something was. I didn't have any pain. I had felt hardly any pain since that accident. What with one thing coming up after another, I hadn't had a moment to notice, but pain had disappeared from my body. My bowel movements were normal. My menstrual cramps were gone. No more headaches or stomach aches. Even my broken rib caused me hardly any pain. I had no idea why such a thing happened, but suddenly I was free of pain. I decided to go on living for the time being, if only for a little while. I wanted to find out what it meant to live life without pain. I could die whenever I wanted to. But to go on living meant for me to pay back my debt. Altogether, I owed more than 3 million yen. In order to pay it back, I became a prostitute. A prostitute? That's right, said Kretakano, as if it were nothing at all. I needed money over the short term. I wanted to pay off my debts as quickly as possible, and that was the only way I knew of to raise the money. I didn't have the slightest hesitation. I had seriously intended to die, and I still intended to die sooner or later. The curiosity I felt about life without pain was keeping me alive, but strictly on a temporary basis. And compared with death, it would be nothing at all for me to sell my body. I see what you mean, I said. The ice in her orange juice had melted, and Kritakano stirred it with her straw before taking a sip. Do you mind if I ask you a question? I asked. No, not at all, please. Didn't you consult with your sister about this? She was practicing her austerities on Malta at the time. As long as that went on, she refused to send me her address. She didn't want me to disrupt her concentration. It was virtually impossible for me to write to her during the entire 3 years she lived on Malta. I see, I said. Would you like some more coffee? Yes, please, said Kretakano. I went to the kitchen and warmed the coffee. While I waited, I stared at the exhaust fan and took several deep breaths. When it was ready, I poured the coffee into fresh cups and brought it to the living room on a tray, together with a plate of chocolate cookies. We ate and drank for a while. How long ago did you try to kill yourself? I asked. I was 20 at the time. That was 6 years ago, in May of 1978. May of 1978 was the month that Kumiko and I had married. So then, the very month we were married, Greta Kano had tried to kill herself, and Malta Kano was practicing her austerities in Malta. I went to a neighborhood that had lots of bars, approached the first likely looking man I saw, negotiated a price, went to a hotel and slept with him, said Greta Kano. Sex no longer gave me any physical pain at all, nor any pleasure either. It was just a physical movement. Neither did I feel guilt at doing sex for money. I was enveloped in numbness, an absence of feeling so deep the bottom was lost from view. I made very good money this way, close to 1 million yen in the first month alone. At that rate, I could easily repay what I owed in 3 or 4 months. I would come home from campus, go out in the evening, and get home from work by 10 at the latest. I told my parents I was waiting on tables, and no one suspected the truth. Of course, they would have thought it strange if I returned so much money all at once. So I decided to give my father 100,000 yen a month and save the rest. But then one night, when I was propositioning men by the station, 2 men grabbed me from behind. At first I thought it was the police, but then I realized they were gangsters. They dragged me into a black street, showed me some kind of knife, and took me into their local headquarters. They shoved me into a black room, stripped my clothes off, strung me up by the wrists, and proceeded to rape me over and over in front of a video camera. I kept my eyes closed the entire time and tried not to think, which was not difficult for me because I felt neither pain nor pleasure. After a while, they showed me the video and told me that if I didn't want anyone to see it, I should join their organization and work for them. They took my student ID from my purse. If I refused to do what they wanted, they said they would send a copy of the tape to my parents and blackmail them for all the money they were worth. I had no choice. I told them I would do as they said, that it didn't matter to me. And it really didn't matter. Nothing mattered to me then. They pointed out that my income would go down if I joined their organization because they would take 70%. But that I would no longer have to go to the trouble of finding customers by myself or worry about the police. They would send me high quality customers. If I went on propositioning men indiscriminately, I would end up strangled to death in some hotel room. After that, I didn't have to stand on street corners anymore. All I had to do was show up at their office in the evening and they would tell me which hotel to go. They sent me good customers as they had promised. I'm not sure why, but I received special treatment. Maybe it was because I looked so innocent. I had an air of breeding about me that other girls lacked. There were probably a lot of customers who wanted this not-so-professional type. The other girls had 3 or more customers a day, but I could get away with seeing only 1 or at most 2. The other girls carried bleepers with them and had to hurry to some rundown hotel when the office called them to sleep with men of uncertain background. In my case, though, I always had a proper appointment in a proper first-class hotel, or sometimes even a condo. My customers were usually older men, rarely young ones. The office paid me once a week, not as much as I used to make on my own, but not a bad amount including individual tips from customers. Some customers wanted me to do some pretty weird things for them, of course, but I didn't mind. The weirder the request, the bigger the tip. A few of the men started asking for me on a regular basis. These tended to be good tippers. I saved my money in several different accounts, but actually, by then, the money didn't matter to me. It was just rows of figures. I was living for one thing only, and that was to confirm my own lack of feeling. I would wake up in the morning and lie there, checking to see that my body was not sensing anything that could be called pain. I would open my eyes, slowly collect my thoughts, and then, one part at a time, check the feeling I had in my body from head to foot. I had no pain at all. Did this mean that there was nothing hurting me? Or that even though there was pain, I was not feeling it? I couldn't tell the difference. Either way, it didn't hurt. In fact, I had no sensation at all. After this procedure, I would get out of bed, go to the bathroom, and brush my teeth. Then I would strip off my pajamas and take a hot shower. There was a terrible lightness to my body. It was so light and airy, it didn't feel like my body. I felt as if my spirit had taken up residence inside a body that was not my own. I looked at it in the mirror, but between myself and the body I saw there, I felt a long, terrible distance. A life without pain, it was the very thing I had dreamed of for years, but now that I had had it, I couldn't find a place for myself within it. A clear gap separated me from it, and this caused me great confusion. I felt as if I were not anchored to the world, and this world I had hated so passionately until then. This world that I had continued to revile for its unfairness and injustice. This world where at least I knew who I was. Now the world had ceased to be the world, and I had to cease to be me. I began to cry a lot. In the afternoon, I would go to a park, the Shinjuku Imperial Garden or Yoyogi Park, to sit on grass and cry. Sometimes I would cry for an hour or two at a time, sobbing out loud. Passerby would stare at me, but I didn't care. I wish that I had died that time, that I had ended my life on the night of May 29th. How much better off I would be. But now I could not even die. In my numbness, I lacked strength to kill myself. I felt nothing, no pain, no joy, all feeling was gone, and I was not even me. Greta Kano took a deep breath and held it. Then she picked up her coffee cup, stared into it for a while, gave her head a little shake, and put the cup back on the saucer. It was around that time that I met Noboru Wataya. Noboru Wataya? As a customer? Greta Kano nodded in silence. But I began, then stopped to consider my words for a time. I'm having a little trouble with this. Your sister told me the other day that Noboru Wataya raped you. Was that something separate from what you're telling me now? Greta Kano took the handkerchief from her lap and dabbed at her mouth again. Then she looked directly at me. Something about her eyes stirred my heart in a way I found unsettling. I'm sorry to bother you, she said, but I wonder if I might have another cup of coffee. Of course, I said. I transferred her cup from the table to the tray and carried it into the kitchen. Waiting for the coffee to boil, I leaned against the drain board with my hands thrust in my pockets. When I carried the coffee back into the living room, Greta Kano had vanished from the sofa. Her bag, her handkerchief, every visible sign of her was gone. I went to the front entrance, from which her shoes were gone as well. Terrific,